Now we're going to go back to build the registration slash login part. So what this is going to do is, like I said earlier, when a user comes to the platform, if you put your email and password, if you already exist, we'll log you in. If you don't exist, we'll create an account for you and also log you in. So we are doing the two things at the same time. Let's go back to the source folder. Let's go into the controller. Let's go to auth.ts. All right, here inside register or login, this is where we are going to do that. So whenever we get this data, we want to use that. So first of all, if you look at our routes, we go to our routes and go to auth.ts. You see that we are validating using join schema from our schema validation. So if we take a look at our join schema for YUP, we see that we are going to have an email and a password in the body. So let's go back. Let me close this up. Let's go back to the controller. So we have, let me close this up. Let's destructure email and password from the body. So we are saying that we are taking away email and password, and they are of type email string, password string. You can create a types for this or DT or whatever, but I'm just going to leave this way. So this is the typing, and we're getting that from request of body. Now, once we do this, what do we want to do? We don't have to check if there is an email or if there's a password, because that is what the UP is going to do for us in our routes. That is what that validate is going to do for. If I go back to the validate functions here, whenever this is called and we pass in any of these, it's going to run. So this is going to run our routes. So if we go to our routes, you find this join schema, then this is going to run and it's going to check if there's an email or if there's a password, and same for the rest of them that we have created. So we don't have to go back into our controller and then start checking, is there a password, is there an email, because that is the work of the middleware. So by the time we get to this point, we are very sure that there is already an email and password there. All right, then what do we want to do? So we're going to say try cache. Let's use a try cache block. And then we remember, first of all, we want to check if this user exists in the database. So we're going to import the user model by saying import user, not from here, import user from dot slash. I'm going to say models. So we are importing user from here. So let's go to the try part of our code and let's say const user. So let's say underscore user is equals to await. So we are awaiting this thing user dot find. So we want to find one where the email is email. I'm sorry, where email is this. So we can just see email is email like this, but we can just leave it like this. So it's the same thing. And then we want to select the password. So we're going to say dot select. And what do we want to select? Password. Because normally we set the password to be select false. So we want to select it. And I'm going to say execute here. I also call this. All right. So now that we have called this will then check if it finds anything, any email that it matches this in our database, then it's going to return a user for us. If it doesn't find anybody, then that means this user does not exist, and that means we are going to create this user account. So if the user exists, what do we want to do? We want to say that if user exists, so if user, if underscore user, if we have a user, then we first of all want to make sure that the password that this user has given to us is the same password that we have in our database. But one thing is this, we should not store plain password in the database. So if somebody says their password is 123, we shouldn't store 123 in the database. So by the time we store the password in the database, it is not going to be just as the user has given it to us. So then we have to either hash it or whatever, but we just want to make sure that when a user gives us a password, we're not going to store the plain text like that in a database. So in the case that even peradventure there is a problem and maybe a hacker or somebody gets access to our database, even if they look at people's password, they won't be able to guess what it is. So somebody will just get access to the database and then see, oh, your email is johndoe@gmail.com and your password is admin. So okay. So we are going to use a JavaScript npm package to help us in securing this password. And we are going to install what's it called? Bcrypt.js. So that's going to help us to hash the password, we'll pass a sort and it hash the password, and then also it's also going to help us to compare this password when we want to use them in this sense. So let's go back to our terminal. I'm going to kill the server. I'll clear. I'm going to say yarn add dash yarn add first of all bcrypt js. Now after adding bcrypt, I'm going to add the typing. So I'm going to say yarn add dash d add types slash bcrypt js. So now that this has been added, we can now use bcrypt.js here. So we're going to say if, so one bcrypt.js to compare. If now it is going to be asynchronous, so we have to await it. If bcrypt, which we have not actually imported, so let's go up and import that. So we're going to say import bcrypt from bcrypt.js. So we're importing bcrypt from there. Bcrypt, yeah. So we're going to say await bcrypt.compare. So we want you to compare asynchronous. So what are we comparing? We are comparing the password that the user has given to us to the password that we have stored in our database to see if they match. Now, one thing you need to know, when you are comparing the bcrypt compare method, you are going to pass the actual password, which is coming from the user first, then the password that has already been hashed second. So that one is going to come from the database. So I'm going to say bcrypt.compare, and we are going to pass in password, and then the one that has already been hashed, which is in the database already, is going to be from underscore user dot password. So we now compare. So and remember, we have a negation here. That is, if it is not the same, we are going to return an error by simply saying return res.status 400. So bad request, and .json error is invalid email or password. So we don't care. We're not telling the user that, oh, it is the email that is not correct or it is the password that is not correct. So when you see this error, you won't be able to tell which of them is not correct. Is it the password or the email? So I think I might have a bug here. Let me take this out and see why we have the flag. Okay, so this if is supposed to end here. Don't know why I have that. Think like this, two more. Yeah, that is it. So, and then I'll have this inside here. So what we are simply saying that if this runs, if bcrypt compare the password that the user provides with the one in database and they do not match, then we're going to throw an error, invalid email or password. But if they match, we want to create a token for the user. Now the token is just going to come from a package. We're going to use a package to create this token, which will then pass to our user, and then we will be able to use that token to verify this user in the later part of our application. So what do we want to use here? We are going to use passport, and we're going to use passport JWT. So what is JSON Web Token? You can just search. If I go to my browser, or I go to and I type JSON Web Token, you open up JSON Web Token website. Okay, oh, I have this is the npm package. I thought it was the site. Let's go. Okay, the site is jwt.io, not JSON Web Token actually. So now you can go and read more about the encryption here. What we're going to simply do is this is what we are going to use to validate our user. So when somebody logs in, we give them a JWT that they'll keep sending to us whenever they want to access anything, any resource that we need protection for. We will require them, okay, do you have a token? And does this token, is it still valid? Has it expired? You know, and all that. Because JSON Web Token is going to tell us when we issued it, has it expired, and all that. So we'll be using this. You can read more about that. Let me go back to our code here. So first of all, we are going to install those packages. So let's go back to our terminal and install them. So let me clear. Let's say yarn add JSON Web Token. Let's add passport, and let's add passport dash JWT, which is the passport strategy that we'll be using. So after installing that, let's clear. We need to install their types. So I'm going to say add -d. I say add types slash passport, add types slash passport dash JWT. Now we don't need to install types for JSON Web Token because it has types already. So that is that. All right, we're done installing JWT passport and passport and JWT. So what do we want to do? We are, first of all, there are a couple of things we need to set up for our JWT to work, which is we need to pass a secret to JWT, which is simply going to be the secret that only we know or only our server knows. So if you want to decrypt the data, you have to pass that secret. So we go back here. Let's go to our env and let's create another variable. Let's call it JWT underscore secret. So this secret here, I'm just going to type anything random thing. So if you copy that, it doesn't matter. And then one other thing we need to pass to JWT is when does this token that you're going to get, when is it going to expire? If you don't pass anything, it's never going to expire. But we want it to actually expire. We don't want you to just generate a token. Maybe you log in today and you stay logged in forever. So let's say JWT underscore expires in. Then we can say, if you want to say day, you can say 1 day by 1 day, or say 34 days by 34 days, or but I want to say hours will expire in 1 hour. So after 1 hour, then you'll be asked to log in, or maybe 1 minute if you want to say, depending on you. So these two things now, we need to pass it to JWT when we are creating our secret and our expiring. So with this our secret now, we are sure that as long as nobody knows our secret, no one else knows that, our JWT should be safe. So I'll save this file now and go back to the auth. So now I want to write a simple function that will create the token for me. I'm going to import JWT. So I'm going to say import JWT from JSON Web Token. And then I'm going to create the function. So the function is called sign token. Let me close this guy. It's called sign token, and it's going to take the user ID, which I just called an ID here, which is a string. And then I'm going to call this JWT method called sign. So it's going to sign it and return me a token. So it's going to sign. And what are the things I need there? Just the ID. So I just want only the ID to be there. So I pass that option here. And then I need to pass in the secret. So I say process.env.jwt underscore secret as string. Remember that whenever our application loads, the .env package we configured earlier will load all our environment variable into the node process. So we can read it from here. Then after that, we pass another option as an object, and we pass in the expires in. When do we want this particular token to expire? And we're also reading from our environment variable, which is JWT underscore expires in, which we set up earlier. So anytime we call this now, is going to return a JWT token for us. So if I scroll down, let's go back here, and let's say const. So if there is a user, we say const token equal to sign token. So which is going to be returned, and then we are going to pass the user ID. So I'm going to say underscore user dot underscore ID. So this is now going to return a JWT token for us, and we need to send it back. Now, once we get the token, we are going to send a JSON back to the client. And we're going to say return res.status 200, which simply means that it was successful. And then we are going to send a JSON that contains the token, the email, and the ID of the user. So we are sending back a token, the email, and the ID of the user. And then we're just changing it to ID here instead of underscore ID, because MongoDB will give us underscore ID on the fly. So we are sending this back to the client. Now remember, this is only if the user already exists. So what if the user does not exist? What do we want to do? Now, if the user does not exist, then we will get here. If the user exists, then immediately we get where we will return, and we won't even get to to this part. But if it doesn't exist, then we'll skip all this part and get down here straight up. So I'm going to say const new user, and we're going to create the user. So I'm going to say await. So I want to await user dot create. say MongoDB mongoose method. So and then we are going to pass in the options, which is going to be the email and the password of the that the user provided to us. So once we do this, we expect that we now have a user in our database. So once we create this, what do we want to do? We also want to create another token again. So I'm going to say const token again. Now there will not be confliction because this token is inside this block. Remember, const block scope, so it doesn't have anything to do with this one. So it's not going to throw an error like we are trying to declare, redeclare an already declared variable. So we're going to say const token is simply sign token again, and then we are going to say that the ID that we're going to pass is the new user dot underscore ID. So this is the user the ID we are going to pass for in this case. So if the user does not exist, we create the user, we pass the ID, and then what do we do? Just like we did here, we have to return a response back. So we return response or status of 201. So in this case, it simply means that we just created this on the server. In the first one, we returned 200 because it simply means that it was successful. But in this case, we created a resource, a new resource. So we have to say 201. And then just like we did earlier, we are sending back the token, the email, which is going to be new user.email. And then we're also sending back the ID, which is also new user dot underscore ID. So with this now, I need to remove this one. This was just for testing. With this now, we are able to create a user on the platform, and whether you are already existing or not, once you give us your email and password, we will just create that for you. Now, in case there is an error, we also want to return the error. If any error occurs at this point, probably it will be coming from the server because our validate function has taken care of the errors that we believe that might come from the user. So we'll just console the error that comes back. We'll console it, then we'll return a status of 500, and then we're going to give you a JSON that is going to say an error occurred while processing your request. Now we don't want to dump the error that comes back. We don't know whatever the error is going to say, so we don't want to dump it back, and we just tell the user, oh, an error occurred while processing your request. You can say something like internal server error or whatever, but I will just leave this here. Why for ourselves, we'll keep this error here. You can maybe have a logger where you then log to the maybe log file or whatever to so that you can go back later and take a look at the error and find out what was wrong. All right, so with this now, we are done creating our register or login function. So if I hit the join route now, /alt/join, and I pass in an email and password, my account will be created and I will have a JWT token, my email, and my ID for me. So let me go back and start up the server, and then let's yarn dev. If I go back to my terminal and run yarn dev, we have the server starting up, and I will go back to Thunder client. So I will just click here, click on Thunder client, and then I'll click on here. So I want to pass in an email and a password. Now this password is too long, but I'm going to say TST. So I need to pass an email. Let's say John at gmail.com. Remember, we are not validating this email if the user is actually the user. We're just doing that. If you want to validate email, you might have to send an email or maybe an SMS. I have a video on sending emails using nodejs. So if you want to probably extend this and send email using nodejs, you'll see a link to the video in the top right corner of this video. So you can click on that and then watch it to learn how to send email. Probably you want to send a token to verify this email here. All right, now this email here is the password here is 4 letters, so it's going to fail from our validation because our validation says that it should be 7. So if you go to our schema, oh, not here, oh, I go back here and I search for schema. If I go to this index of schema here, if I go to the join schema, it says, if you look at here, it says that the minimum password should be 7. So I'm supposed to get this error of password must be greater than 6. So let me see if the server is up. Okay, the server is up, is connected to the database. Now let me go back to our post request. Now if I hit this, I'm expecting that error. So I'm going to say send. And it says password must be greater than 6. So this is our middleware intercepting that. And then if you don't even have password at all, the password field, okay, let me remove the password. Finish. It's going to say password is required. So if I send, it says password is required. So that is why we don't even need to go and check if there is password in our controller, because our middleware already takes care of that. So let me put this back now and let me create an account. So I'm going to say test 1, 2, 3. So this should give me a log. It should create a user with this my email and password because I don't exist already, and then give me like log me in by giving me a token and all that. And also when I hit this request again, it's simply just going to log me in without creating me again. So if I click now, it sends me a token. So this is my JWT token, and then it says this is my email and this is my ID. So if I go to the database now, if I go back to browser and I go to MongoDB, now if you are here, just click on browse collections. Now once this loads up, we see that we have recipes from the name we gave it here. We gave it recipe, and here it's called recipes, and we have users. So we are supposed to have a single user. So I click on user here. Now you see that we have a user. We have a user by the name of, let me see if I can bring this up. Oh, it's too much. By the name of john@gmail.com. Now, if you notice, my password is simply stored at test1234, which is not what we want to do. But I want to show you that it has been created successfully. We have my ID, which is ending AF2B. If I go back to what we got back here, we have AF2B. And the password was not selected, was not sent back because we set it to select first. Now, one thing we need to do is, if we are creating for the first time, we want to hash the password. We just don't want to create the user. So we're going to go back for the password here and say that the password is going to be await. Let me close this up. I'm going to say await bcrypt, because remember it's a synchronous request, dot hash. So we want to hash the password that the user provides. One other thing we need to provide to bcrypt is a sort. So we need to provide a sort. Now, one thing you should keep in mind is that the higher the sort value, the longer time it takes for it to be created. So I'm going to go right up here inside the source folder. I'm going to right click and click on new folder. I'll call it constants. So anything that I have that is going to be a constant, I'll have it stored here, constants. And I will call this one constants too, perhaps constants.ts. And I'm just going to say export const enum. So this is going to be an enum, and I'm going to say that sort equals to 12. So if anytime I call sort, it's going to be equal to 12. Now, just like I did, I create in the rest of the file folders, I'm going to create an index file here, index.ts, where I'm going to export the export our constant. I guess I think what's the name? Let me check the name again. The name is constants. Okay, so I'm going to export constants. Now I'm going to say import constants. I think it's constant or something. I don't know. Constants from dot slash constant. Now let me check. I think the spelling was actually it was correct. I don't know why it was not coming up. Anyways, let's go back to auth and now let's pass a sort by importing constant. Does it work now? I think it worked. And we say dot sort. So if I close this up, now we have constant dot sort, and we're importing that from this is, well, we could still leave it like this. It still work. Absolute import against a relative import, it still works. So we are importing this from the constant index, so we don't have to say slash constant slash constant.ts. Why we don't have that is that should you have any reason to have more constants in somewhere else, everything will be exported from the index.ts file. So that is why I keep creating that, so that each time we go into the index.ts for a particular folder, we know that everything in that folder is exported there or has been exported from that side. So now we have this. So now when we save, our password is not going to be like what we have. Go back to the browser. Like here we have test1234. We're not just going to have to test1234. And if you look at here, we now have created that and updated that, which is just the timestamp true that we set for from our MongoDB schema, from our mongoose schema. So I go to not models. If If I go here and I go to user, for example, you see the if I scroll down, you see where we have timestamp true. That is what created the what is it? The created art and the updated art fields for us. We didn't have to create that. All right. Now going back to our application. Let me close this up. We now have a source. We make sure that the password is going to be hashed. One thing I want to do is since I already have a user, I can just delete the user from the database from here. So I don't know what I clicked. I can just click on this icon for delete and I'll click on delete. So by the time I delete now, we shouldn't have any user in the database. So let's go back and save, I think, and let's make sure that our server restart is up. Server is up. Let's hit that request again. I will see that our password should be secured. So where is live server? So let's hit it again. This time around, I know my ID will change. So I'll send. Now I have a new ID, still the same email. Then the token is obviously the token is different. Let's take a look at our database. So I'm going to find a way for this to refresh. I will just go to the recipes, and then come back to this users, and then I have a new user. Now, if you look at the password field has been encrypted, hashed to whatever, and then this is what we are storing in our database. So even if somebody manages to get access to our database, if they look at this, I believe there's no way they will guess that this is there's 1 2 3 4, and that's that. So that is why we need to hash our password before storing to the database. So with this now, we are ready to go. So if I hit this request again, it's not going to create a new user because I already see this time around it says 200. Earlier it was 201. So to confirm that again, let me just delete this user again. Let me delete this user. Now, if I hit this request, if you look at the status code, it's going to be 201 because it was created. So if I send that, it says 201 created. Now, if I hit again, it's just going to say 200 because it found the user 200. So with this now, we are done with our login and sign up functionality. So a user can log in or whatever, sign up. Both of them are the same in our own case here. And we are ready to move on to the recipes. Now, let's go back to the Explorer. Let's go to the controllers and go to the recipe here, recipe 5. Let me check my index. It's not exported, so there's nothing exported here. So first of all, we are going to create about, I think, 5 endpoints here, but we're going to leave one for the last, which is the create recipe. So for a user to be able to create recipe, we are going to do that one, create that endpoint last, because we have to go out here and then register some other accounts. So I want to do that last. So what I'm going to do is let's start with the first one, which is going to be getting all the recipes there. So I'm going to say export const get all recipes. So this is going to be asynchronous, and then it's going to take in request and response. And let me import types from Express. I'm going to import request response from Express. What am I seeing? So I'm importing request and response from Express. I'm going to say that request is of type request, and then response is of type response. So what do we want to do? Let me close this off. Now, very simple. Once you hit this, we just want to get all the recipes and the user that have created them and send them back to you. So we can simply do a try catch here. Very simple one. And we're going to import our recipe model. So we're going to say import recipe from source/model. So that's the absolute part. And then right here, we're going to say const recipes. So all the recipes that we can find in a database. Currently, if you hit this route, you will not get any recipes. So you're just going to have an empty array. So I'm going to say await recipe, which is the recipe model, dot find. So I'm going to pass in an empty option. So you can say find where this is this, where this is that, but in our case, just find everything. We don't care. But what we want to do is this. When we get recipes, if you remember that we referenced those when we are creating our recipe schema, we reference the user. So any user that creates a recipe, we pass in the user ID to the recipe document or collections. So we want to populate that user. So whenever you fetch a recipe, we want to also send back the user that created that thing to you. So we're going to say dot populate. So we're calling the populate method. And what do you want to populate? User. Remember, user is the name. If I say recipe and I go to the models, I go to recipe here. If I scroll, you see that we have this field here called user, which is referencing the user collection. So that is what we are calling here. So when we say populate user, so we say take that user, which is the ID of the user that we stored, go to the users collection and find the user that has that ID. Now, one other thing we need to do is we don't want the password or the ID of the user. We just want the email. So I'm going to say comma email. So what this simply means is I only want you to fetch the email of this user. So I want you to populate the user and only fetch the email for me. I don't need any other information. So let's assume that this is like an elaborate or a very big application, and you have things like first name, last name, date of birth. We don't want any of that information. So we only want the email. So that's what we have done here. Now, one other thing we need to do is we want to sort. We're going to say dot sort. We are chaining these methods here. So we want to sort this item. We don't want them to just come back. And we're going to sort using the ID field. We're going to say that it's going to be -1. I think it's underscore ID. And this simply -1 simply means from descending order. So we are using the ID because the ID from MongoDB comes with the timestamp. So the ID, the recipes that is created first will be last. Then, for example, I have two recipes. If I create one now, the one I created now will come first before those other ones I already have. So we are sorting by that. We can also sort by maybe created at, but I'm just using the ID. So when we have a timestamp that has created at and updated at, and then maybe you can just use created at also to sort here. But in this case, I'm just using the ID to sort. So what I'm simply doing is that I'm fetching all the recipes, and then what am I doing with them? I'm populating the user, but I just want to get the user email, and then I'm sorting them using the ID in descending order. So from the one that came in last, that is the one that will appear first. All right. Now, once we have all our recipes, what do we want to do? We want to send them back to the user. So I'm going to say return. Probably we don't even need the return keyword, but let's just say return response dot status, which is going to be 200. Simply mean that it is successful. Dot JSON, and we are going to have passing recipes. So with this now, it is successful. If we have an error, something happens. What do we want to do? We just want to throw an error, and we're going to say rest of status 500, just like we did earlier. I will say that an error called while processing your request. Then here you can log it to maybe you want to log it somewhere, maybe to a server or whatever. But in our case, we just want to put it in the console. So with this now, we are able to fetch all the recipes in our database and populate the user, and we also sort them. The next thing we're going to do is now let's get a particular recipe, a single recipe. One thing I have missing in this my query here is my exec function. So I'm going to pass in the exec here so that it executes. Now let's create the one for getting a single recipe. So I'm just going to pass this here. Now we have export const get recipe, which is going to be async request is taking request of request and rest of response. So that is the type of response. And then we are destructuring the ID from request.params. So if you remember, our validate middleware is going to take care of checking that these things are not empty. So we don't have to come here in our controller to check if the values are there or not. We are doing that right from our middleware. So once we do this, then we are going to try to find which recipe has this ID. So we're going to say try. I'm just going to be using try cache. It's very uh, nice for to use here. It's very easy for me to explain what's going on. So we want to test this out. So let's use const recipe. Now this is an ID. It's just going to give us one. So it's just going to be called recipe. We'll say await the recipe model dot find one. Find by ID. So I want to say find by ID. So I can say find one and still use the ID, but I want to say find by ID. So since the method already exists, and then what is the ID? I'm just going to pass the ID coming from request.params. And also, just like I did earlier, I'm going to populate. So not polygon, populate. So I want you to populate the user, and I just want only the email. Oh, sorry, only the email. And I'll also pass my exec here. So with this now, we are trying to find a recipe that has this ID. If we did not find any recipe, we are just going to have null back. So you can decide to maybe throw an error. For example, you say no recipe found with this ID, or maybe you just send back null, or I don't know, anyone you want to do. So in my own case, I think I would just say I will just return whatever it comes back. So I'm going to say rest of status is 200, so successful .json recipe. But if this actually fails to find anything, I think we should throw an error. So I'm going to say if no recipe. So if we don't have any recipe, we want to say return res.status is going to be 404. We didn't find that.json. And we're going to pass in an error that simply says, let's say invalid ID, or recipe not found, probably recipe not found. I think that's what we should do. So, but if we find that, we get here. If we do not find that, we'll return at this point. We won't even get to this particular line of code. But if there is recipe, then we're going to send it back. So if you just type some gibberish ID and send back to us, we'll just do this error for you. All right, then if there's an error, I think I will just copy the error from here and use it. So I think the error is the same. So we're just going to do the same thing. We'll tell you, oh, an error occurred while processing your request. So with this now, we have been able to set up getting recipes, getting all recipe, and getting a specific recipe. The other thing we need to do is get user recipe. So we want to get recipe that belongs to a particular user. Now it's kind of similar to this one, so I can copy it and just change what we need to do. So I'm going to copy everything here, and I will go down, I'll paste, and I'll change the name to get user recipes. So all the recipes that belong to a user, I'm going to change this to be user ID. So we're going to get user ID from request.params. So we're going to call this recipe. It's going to be an array of several recipes. And we're going to say, instead of find by ID, we're going to say find. And we have to now pass in that it's going to be where user is user ID. Remember, we have a user key in the recipes schema. And of course, we want you to populate by user, but we only need the email. But one other thing we need to do is to sort. So we want to sort them dot sort. We want to sort them by underscore ID and also -1. So the from the latest one going down to the one that has been there in the past. So if we don't have, now this is going to be an array, so we are going to say dot length. So if we have nothing, that means it's either the user ID is invalid. So we are going to say recipes not found, because this is going to come out with an empty array. So we are checking if the array length is less than 1, then we're going to throw this error that, oh, we didn't find anything. We could also make it maybe 400 or so, but I'm just going to say 404 because we didn't find anything. So, but if we find something, we're just going to return every of these array of recipes that belong to that particular user back to the user. So we have been able to set up this particular one, which is very, very simple. So with just the first one and the second one, you'll be able to create any other thing you want to create here.